All right, here we go. It's Your Business, hosted by the Bold Business Podcast. And guess what? Guess what? This is your go-to source for navigating today's ever-evolving business landscape. I'm glad to be your host, Jess Duell, and I am here with Christy Maxfield. We will introduce ourselves in just a moment. This is where we get real. We get real about what it means to be in business today. We get real about talking about things that maybe you heard 5 years and 10 years ago, because guess what? They haven't been solved yet. So we're still thinking about them. And I think we're in this place where we get to do this now. Christy will weigh in, I'm sure, because a little bit of individualization, a little bit of customization, leveraging who we are and what we have, in addition to the tools available to us, make or break what we're doing in business. And that's what makes it bold or not, right, Christy?
For sure. Yeah. Most of the problems are the same problems other people have dealt with for years and years and years and years. There's just new ways of dealing with them, and there's your ways of dealing with them. So it's the opportunity to really approach your business from your perspective, learn from others, and make it your own.
That's it. Now, I'm Jess Duell. Not only do I host the Bold Business Podcast, I founded Red Direction a long time ago. We're talking about strategic planning, strategic growth, and doing the right work at the right time. Christy, tell us about you.
Christy Maxfield, founder and president of Purpose First Advisors. We focus on creating growth strategies through the lens of succession and exit planning so that owners can get the most out of their business at every stage in the journey.
Yeah. And we're here and we're talking today about why good plans go bad. And it was an interesting conversation that we were having as it's something that came up through a lot of different conversations. And I said, ooh, maybe this one, maybe we could dive right in here. And it's amazing to see and hear and feel all that this encompasses. And we're going to touch just on one little piece. We might go a little broad. Our goal is, though, to go deep with whatever we do decide to cover, knowing it's just a tiny piece of a bigger topic. And good plans going bad, it's most important right now, in my opinion, because as we're talking about this in October, it's that time where we're starting to think about, well, what are we doing next? And the bigger our company, the earlier we've started planning. The smaller our company, we may try and actually be able to push it off until January, but you know what? You're starting behind at that point. So I know Christy and I share this: plan early, plan often, and let's get in the game. And so that's part of the why now. But the other reason that why now for good plans going bad is specifically because we are talking about discomfort. It is hard and it is uncomfortable to be present and to be bold in our action and stay that course. And so our ability to tolerate this discomfort and hold accountability is truly what will set us apart.
Absolutely. I think it's particularly relevant because at this point in the year, you're probably looking at your plan and thinking it has gone bad and being disappointed and wanting to share so many thoughts and feelings with your team, and either shying away from that because you don't want to be in that space of discomfort, or not knowing how to do it in a way that doesn't come across as angry or accusatory. When really what you want to be, you're disappointed, right? You're probably frustrated and disappointed, and those are really legit feelings. But you don't necessarily want to communicate those feelings to your team as much as you want them to reflect on, where did this go off track? And I've been thinking a lot about, it's like, when good plans go bad, like we decided to start carrying a switchblade and smoking cigarettes, right? Like,
that's awesome.
It's like, the plan didn't actually go bad. He, she, it, they did not go bad. The execution of it went poorly. The plan didn't come to fruition, or the results that you desired you're not closer to them. They haven't manifested, or the reality hasn't changed substantially enough to feel closer to them. And so, that may, we'll talk later about why that might be a flaw in how the plan was developed. But, the outcome is not what you desired. But the plan actually may not have gone bad at all. It may not have spoiled in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting when we're in the moment. So to add to this, as we're kind of setting up this tolerating discomfort, and I'm listening to you and in our pre-work sessions, and I really think that one of the things that we overlook, Christy, is that we think accountable is elusive, and it's actually not elusive.
Oh
It
no.
is it is the way we do our work, and what do we do when our work isn't done that way. And so how can we show up? What can we do there? And I know in this world, none of us want to be a bad guy. None of us want to be the person who brings everybody down. But guess what? One of my favorite things is constraints, because as soon as you take a bowling alley and you get rid of the gutters and all you do is fill them up with those bumpers, you can get that ball to the pins at the other side. And that's actually what accountability is. It helps us get to our goal more. And so shifting our lens about tolerating that discomfort and where we're actually going and what it unlocks is huge compared to what it is in the moment. The skill.
Oh, yeah. And I had a conversation with a new client today. First time we're really digging in on their business. And I asked about their values. And one of the phrases he used was like, we don't do that around here, right? Was the idea that there are certain things that when you're part of our team, this is the way you do business. This is how you show up. This is how we do business here. And these other things are not how we do business here. Mm-hmm. And I find that comes up a lot. But that requires having a way of doing business and having it well communicated and having the systems and the people in place who understand and work together and facilitate all of that. So when I hear you say, how do we work, the way we do the work we do, the constraints that we say exist, because we're not going to do certain things, they're outside of our value set. So we can't accomplish our goal doing these things, but we can accomplish our goals doing these things. And so, we're not going to compete against each other for scarce resources. We're going to create abundance and we're going to collaborate together, right? That might be one set of constraints that are there. And then there's other constraints that are legit, like financial and time and other things that we all are subject to.
Yeah. And so that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with institutionalizing. Nope, that's not true. We're going to start with, what is our script for accountability? That's number one. Number two is the institutionalization, the hey, it's okay that this is ingrained in who we are for the way we do our work here. And the third thing is engaging from the beginning with everybody that has a role. So those are going to be the three areas that we are talking about as we're talking about being comfortable with the uncomfortable, specifically tolerating discomfort around this concept of execution, so that they are less likely to go bad or sideways or have less pitfalls along the way as we're doing our execution. Because wherever you happen to be right now, you might be at the beginning and going, cool, this is perfect timing. Some of you might be in the middle and it's like, oh, okay, I guess I can jump in and maybe we can make small adjustments and see if we can get there. And some of us are like, yep, we're on that path and it's working. Or, yep, we're on that path and this wasn't the ride we signed up for. That's also okay. There will be something for you to take away as well. So, Christy, as we're jumping in, right, this concept of this first section where we're talking about we've got to have our own script for accountability. And when I think about that, what does that mean to you? That's the first thing I want to know.
For me, it's the story you're telling in your head, either about why you can't get things done or why your team can't get things done. And then what does it mean to be accountable and to hold others accountable? So there's a couple different storylines. They tend to intersect. Perhaps they reinforce one another. But to really take a step back and say, is your underlying beliefs that nobody's going to do what they say they're going to do? And are they living up to that expectation? Is the underlying belief that everybody should just know what they're supposed to do and do it? And setting a tone and probably a false expectation of what is possible in a scenario like that. Or is your own narrative around looking at what's going on or what's not happening and then having a lot of excuses for why that's not happening versus identifying some reoccurring behaviors that are no longer serving you well and need to be changed. So it's kind of like, first, as an owner, as a business owner, as a business leader, as the chief strategist for your organization, what are you telling yourself about being accountable, holding others accountable, and moving the organization in a way that it's clear that we do what we say we're going to do. And this is how we do it to achieve the results we want. What's in your head about that?
A lot. I'm going to stick with where you started though, so that we can get some depth here. And that would
Excellent.
be, it's always hard to notice our beliefs. It is always hard to understand what are our beliefs, what is our reality, and where might we be getting in our own way and accidentally sabotaging or accidentally launching and empowering. I'll put both of those in there because they both can be possible and they can both have unrealized outcomes. And so what I would say around that is there needs to, and it doesn't have to be, it's really interesting. It doesn't have to be difficult. I'm trying to think, how could we make something, right? When we say notice, it's like, well, what does that actually mean? Okay, well, in my world, let me just roll up my sleeves here because that's actually what's happening. In my world, when somebody comes to me and they're telling me this problem, I'm like, well, let's notice this. Or have you noticed that? And most likely after our first conversation, whether we're working together or not, doesn't matter, is notice. So every day, have this concept in mind. How does accountability, or where is accountability in my business? And that could be for or against, is or is not in my business. And at the end of every day, just spend literally 60 seconds and write down, where was accountability today? And if it was missing, where was it missing? If it was there, where was it there? If it was awkward, where was it awkward? If it was exciting and something really new came out of it, where was that? And just write it down. Do that for 5 days, every day for 1 week. Because if you can do that every day for 1 week, 1 minute, where is accountability? Then you can see patterns. What showed up? Every day. Where was there frustration? Every day. Because I'll bet we have more excitement and more frustration than we realize. We just let it roll off because we got to keep going. We let it roll off because there's too much other stuff to do and the priority is the priority.
Yeah.
Well, this could be getting in the way of the level of success that we have.
Yeah,
so that's my idea for an example. So I'm like, well, so let's dig it deep and let's actually do this. Well, so what do you have now? Take it out. Here's that's my off the cuff example because I use it it's actually not off the cuff. The accountability piece is the fill in the blank. What are you noticing? Accountability. Right. Here's how you do that. What are the trends that you see as the outcome? Because now we have conversation starters. All right. So where am I assuming things? Where am I blind? Where are other people feeling frustration? Where is the breakdown occurring? Because it's probably in communication and not a system.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah, no, I'm writing notes furiously as you're talking because what's so important is we have to remember that when we're coaching and leading our teams, we have to be able to describe behavior that we are seeing and want to continue, or seeing behaviors that describing behaviors we're seeing and don't want to continue. So just saying, I need you to be more accountable is not going to help anyone understand what you mean and what accountability looks like in your organization. Like accountability might look like you show up at every meeting with a pad to take notes on, literally a pad, because I don't want devices in the meeting. Maybe one of your cultural things is I don't want devices in the meeting unless they're necessary for a presentation, but I do need you to demonstrate your engagement with this and your understanding by taking notes. Accountability might look like never leaving a meeting without having a clear summary of action items that were discussed, who's responsible for them, and the due dates associated with them. Accountability might look like knowing I have to show up to every meeting prepared to report on the status of whatever it is I'm working on or whatever the purpose of that meeting is for, right? And then if we're not seeing those things, if I kind of think that's doesn't everybody just show up to meetings with pad and paper? Doesn't everybody show up with the status update? Not unless you've ingrained it in part of your culture by explaining that's my explicit expectation. And then pointing out when it's happening and it's not happening. So that noticing first, what am I seeing or not seeing? What would I expect to see if I was seeing the things I wanted to see? If I was experiencing accountability as this palpable, tangible experience, what are some of the things I would be seeing and experiencing? How would I know things are actually getting done and getting done the way I want them, and that the people who are responsible feel a level of accountability and responsibility for them?
Yeah. And well, we're touching on non-negotiables here. I know that when we say non-negotiables, they tend to be bigger, broader things. But I will tell you what, um, how meetings are run will make or break how everything else is
Oh,
run. And
100%.
and I know sometimes people avoid meetings. Well, that's a whole ball of
Or
wax
they
into
meet, but
itself
there's no
too.
agenda, and it's not clear what is supposed to be the end result of us all coming together and meeting. We just know we
Yep.
need to be in the same room together.
Yeah. Yeah. And so after this noticing occurs, and I really appreciate what you're saying here, because we may have an expectation and then we may have the reality of what's actually there. And so is our reality actually possible with our expectation? And
Yeah.
maybe not. So maybe overlaying them together,
Mhm.
shaking them up a little bit and seeing, well, what's one thing? And I will tell you that one thing probably ought to be aligned to whatever your goal for the next 18 months is.
Yeah.
Maybe your vision too, because hopefully your goal is already aligned to that.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, uh, right? And I know, yes, that's it.
We have hopes and aspirations for our watchers and listeners, and we hope you at least have that alignment in place.
Yeah, and sometimes we just got to say it out loud. So if you don't, it's okay. Let's
Right.
just be right here. And that's actually one of the things that business is bold because we got to start exactly where we are. I
Yeah.
mean, was it? I think it was FDR that said, just actually, I'm gonna get it because I had it out here. I had it in a book that I was going to reference that I'm not actually going to use. He was quoted, and I was like, "Ooh, this is so good." It was FDR, but above all, try something.
Yes. Oh, please. For the love of Pete or whoever you love, try
I
it.
wish we were related, because that's act to plan, baby, act to plan.
Exactly. No, and what I really appreciate what you were saying was around, like, we may not even know what beliefs we hold. And one of the beliefs we may hold about strategic planning, having strategy, having a plan to execute strategy, and then what actually happens in terms of the execution phase, where we're calling the inability to execute or execute fully this plan gone bad. Is that one of our beliefs might be that my job is to set the vision, align the strategy to the vision, align the goals and objectives, and decide what the action items are. And your job is to do it. And there's a fundamental flaw in that what we know about how people operate is that simply being handed an edict and being told, go do that, typically does not result in that being done or being done well or being done with the level of fidelity that is required, because they've had no role in actually creating it. So we're going to touch on a lot of these themes throughout our conversation, but what is your underlying belief about what your role is as owner, what your employees' roles are, and how they're supposed to work together to both create the plan and execute the plan? Because if you have some ideas about that's not your role, you don't need to know that, don't trouble yourself with it, let me take care of that about certain things. But then you're also really frustrated that things aren't being executed the way you want. There's probably there's some there, and there's some connection to that belief and the outcome you're experiencing.
Yeah, and definitely embrace your style. So if your style is, my job is to just remove obstacles so you can go do your work, great. However, if you're unclear and you don't have a clear message of, here's where we're going and this is the reason why and this is how you fit in, it's still going to have a breakdown, and people are going to think that you don't really care about their contribution, instead of you thinking you're removing their obstacles. So just both sides of that conversation of perspective. And so as you're talking, Christy, kind of part of this is our script to hold accountable, right? So we were talking about all of the ways accountability might look, and a way to notice and see some trends. And then we're talking about, so now what do we do with them? And I have 3 questions that I just came up with as we were talking, as I was listening to you. And here's what they are. Tell me what you think about these. So we have to create a way to communicate this accountability. We may feel like we're repeating ourselves over and over again. That's good. It means we got the right thing. If we keep changing what we say, we haven't found what we're trying to say yet. So first and foremost, when we're talking about accountability and what it looks like, if we're not repeating ourselves, we don't know what we're saying yet. And hands down, hold up that mirror. We haven't said, this is the way, this is what accountability is here. This is the beginning of how we do our work. And then we can actually see what that means later.
Yes.
So the 3 questions then around that are, what do we need to do to create value? That was a question that I had as an organization, right? Are we doing the right things? And then is your role and those working with you clear and everybody knows how they interact? That was your question. And then what's missing for us to succeed? That would be my 3rd question. We just got to know the gap.
Yes. And so most people skip ahead to what's wrong, what's not working, what do you need? Without checking in to see, do you have role clarity? And does your team have role clarity? And does your team have process clarity?
Mm-hmm.
And does your team have purpose clarity? So the purpose ties all the way back to, what do we need to do to create value? Well, are we all clear on what value it is we're trying to create in the world? And what that requires, and the strategies we have selected to both deliver that value for the customer, but also create that value for the company. Which brings us all the way back to the beginning of, my job might be to remove obstacles from your way. Your job is to execute. But if I haven't backed you into or involved you from the beginning in understanding how all the pieces fit together so that you have clarity of purpose, clarity of process, clarity of role, then chances are you're not going to be able to tell me what's missing. Mm-hmm. Chances are you're not going to be able to tell me where the breakdown is. Clarity is not certainty. Clarity is also not necessarily agreement. Like, you may think I should have chosen a different strategy. That's probably not up for debate. But I'm going to read you into why I chose the strategy I chose. And what I'm always doing with my team is inviting them to be part of executing on that vision and that strategy. If you fundamentally disagree with the choices being made by the leadership of your company, by the owner, then you're probably self-selecting out, because that's not where you feel like you can make your highest and best contribution. I don't think employees should expect to have direct input on vision and strategy. I do expect that they would be read into the process sooner rather than later, and be able to understand why that has been chosen, why this way of creating value for the company and the customer has been chosen, and what it means and what role they have to play.
So this is moving right into our 2nd point, right? Which is institutionalizing. That's going to be a tough word for me today.
It is a very tough word.
That's a lot of syllables, everybody, but I can do it over and over again. All right. And I had mentioned earlier non-negotiables, and that's actually what you were talking about. Our non-negotiable is, this is the strategy, so how are we going to get there? Our non-negotiable might be, some of us are working with this right now. This is how many days we are face-to-face. This is how many days we are remote. Other things might be, please wear shoes. Other things might be, bring your dog to work day. These non-negotiables of just the way who we are, and we can just really show up. I don't mind. I would love to be barefoot all the time. If I lived in a super awesome climate, that's why I said that. I was like, everywhere I've worked, needed to wear shoes. I don't know why that just jumped into my head, but it did. And so I was like, it'd be nice to be in a place where I could probably actually, except for now, if I wanted to, I could be barefoot here. It's my office.
I am so delighted for you. And, there's times where people are like, I get to do that because I'm the boss. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, honestly, if in your office you want to go without shoes, God bless you. That's great.
Yeah.
If you want to tell your employees they have to wear shoes, even though you don't have to wear shoes, fine. That's great. Whatever works for you there. But you may also say that, these are the things that we don't let more than 24 hours business hours go by without acknowledging receipt of an email. Even if we don't craft a response, we simply acknowledge receipt. Like you may say, that's just the culture we have. And the way we are able to work together, collaborate, and move things forward is we agree that we will acknowledge receipt of emails within 24 business hours if we're, working with anybody internally or externally. There are just different things that you just expect when, showing up and wearing shoes is probably more about showing respect and deference.
And it goes to creating value and working to the common values that have been set for the company.
Like,
we all decided to work here.
Wearing shoes is important because, it literally reflects on how we show up and how people perceive us and what kind of preconceived notions they might have about us and our ability to deliver the value we want to deliver.
And sometimes it's about safety and sometimes it's about external regulation. Got to throw those into. I mean,
and again, sometimes it's because I said so. And if you really fundamentally disagree and your piggy toes have to be out more often than they're in, then you might decide to go work somewhere else and bring your skills and talents to that team.
That's exactly right. And, and that does come down to, well, what are our values and how much frustration do we have around the way people are working around us? Because if we're the vision holder and we're the one that is responsible for figuring out what this message is that we're communicating, right? The accountability script that we are sharing out to the world, then what do we have? We have to go, okay, are the things that actually are important and coming out of my mouth aligned to the vision and values that have been set? Are we, or is it most values of most companies have more than one meaning? So is the meaning that your company has chosen actually clear to all?
Correct. And there are times where exceptions to the rule are really harmful, especially when the person who gets to be the exception is the owner. So if we're talking about accountability and strategy execution, and part of the way you do work is to record everything in a certain type of database, project management system, CRM, and the owner refuses to do that, there is absolutely no way that person can, with integrity, expect that the rest of the team will do that, because it's fundamentally undermining the way that this team has decided execution happens. So yeah, I'll let you wear your, if you don't want to wear flip-flops, great, but you're damn well going to use the same reporting and accountability mechanisms that we've all agreed to put in place, because that's the only way we can hold each other accountable. And accountability is truly a two-way street. Most people in your organization will need something from you, even if it's approval or the removal of obstacles, to be successful in their role. And they will need to feel like you have a level of accountability to them to perform those functions, just as they have an accountability to you to perform theirs. So can't be, are you actually undermining the ability of the plan to be executed? Is your plan going bad because you've told everybody else they have to do work in certain ways, but you refuse to work in those ways yourself?
It's, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, I'm like, oh, look at that. Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, I know.
One of the biggest things is a tech stack, right? We're in a technology time, and our company will have a set of technologies that we need to use, and we may not use them, or we may use them in tangent, or we may come back to check that box, but we have this other technology that we are using. There are pros and cons to that. The biggest pro is I'm the most efficient I can be, and I'm actually getting everything done that everybody wants of me. So I am holding myself accountable all the time, and I'm showing up with integrity. The flip side to that is It could be security problems. It could be data breaches. It could just be, hey, apparently people don't actually know the role that's being done because all this other technology is needed. That's not part of what has been put together by the company, which means there's a breakdown in communication about what it actually takes to do this role.
Yeah.
And here's where we can have not only burnout ties into execution failure, weird conversations about process optimization instead of actually doing the work.
Oh, that's a big one.
And hold us back, right? So as you were speaking, that's really what came up to me. And yes, if there is somebody, and it could be anybody, it could be somebody who has the most knowledge within the company because of the longevity of the person in the position that is doing it different than everybody else. Well, until everybody can do it the same way, until everybody can run the same reports, that's when whatever question is asked will be looked at from different people's experience and points of view within the same data set.
Yes. And there is a very real tension between your legacy employee who brings tremendous value to the organization and to the customers and allows you to create value, and the willingness or unwillingness to adopt new ways of doing business. And the easy answer is say, well, fire them, right? But that's not really realistic in most situations. But there is a time that will come between tolerating where they are comfortable staying and requiring them to move forward in the organization by adopting new technologies. Usually, I mean, I think about construction. If everything to make your company run well, for your plan to be executed well, and for you to be able to measure the KPIs that tell you it's being executed well, they all have to use the project management system, and you have a superintendent who writes everything by hand. That's not tenable for the long haul. You will be frustrated. You will be saying, it's not even worth planning because it doesn't get done. And that's not the plan's fault. And it's not the execution strategy that you've laid out or roadmap that you've laid out. It's that there is an outlier that is creating a barrier to you achieving the results that you want. Right. So there is a dynamic tension there that does need to be dealt with. And being able to lead people through change and help them adopt new ways of doing business as that business evolves is incredibly important. Owners are subject to that same, like, I've been doing it this way for 30 years, just as much as line workers are. But we have to really be very careful not to let their personal discomfort, kind of going back to our first note, their personal discomfort can't outweigh our need to actually execute on the plan that we have put in place. Otherwise, we spin our wheels, we spend a lot of resources. I mean, because think about the consequences of the plan going bad. I mean, at best, maybe you just don't gain any ground, but you don't lose any ground. At worst, you've lost ground, or you certainly haven't gained as much as you possibly could. And you spend a lot of time putting the plan together. Something's going to change it. Don't get us wrong. We're not saying your plan isn't going to survive its contact with the real world. There are 10 things that'll happen within the next 10 weeks that will somehow require you to tweak your plan in the way it actually shows up in the world.
Maybe tomorrow.
I'm reading a book called Life is in the Transitions. And it basically said, the summary of what I've read so far is every 12 to 18 months, there'll be a disruptor in our lives.
Yeah.
And 3 to 5, maybe 8 times in our lifetime will we have life quakes that are seriously change the trajectory of our lives. So this isn't that disruption and change to your plan won't happen, but if it's happening because your tech stack or the ability of your team to use your tech stack isn't there, that's problematic. And that's something you have control over.
We do have control over that. And really, okay, so the way that we do our work, because we've always done it here, hides assumptions. And we always, by the way, there's something to be said, because what did we just say? Our values are the way that we do our work, and that's really important. And we want it ingrained so we're all going the same direction in the general pace with our bumpers in the bowling lane so we can get to the pins at the end, right? That said, it doesn't mean we can't change the terrain. It doesn't mean we want to use the thing from 20 years ago because there might be a different or a better way to do it. We can achieve the same. So we have to look at what are the ways we're doing it versus the outcomes that we want. Because the way to stay relevant, the way to ensure, I mean, we're talking about strategy and execution and failure of plans because we all have a place we want to go. We all have a place where we're trying to keep ourselves, our employees, the service we provide relevant today and tomorrow through change. And the only way to do that is to constantly go, cool, what makes us us? Good to great, right? What says, what can we be the best at the world at? And if we can't be the best in the world at it, why are we doing it? And there has to be a really good, compelling reason. So maybe the way doesn't have to be the same, but the outcome can be. One of the things that comes to mind in conversations that I have with a lot of people is switching this concept of, well, every business has a dollars per something in their business, right? This is also, I believe, Jim Collins' concept. A lot of people go dollars for hours, right? That's kind of what we're doing when we're employees. That's kind of what we're doing when we're doing gig work, or being we'll leave it at that. Or lifestyle businesses too. I think there's a great value in that. Can we actually tie those? So the opportunity to grow then becomes well, cool, we could be more efficient at that. That has an upper limit. And what we're talking about when we're talking about failure to execute is typically where what we've always been doing in terms of the way that we are leveraging growth hits its top. We don't recognize it's at the top. And the only way through that plateau is to change the way we look at it.
Yes.
There are a lot of ways to do it. First, we have to be willing. And this is way, way bigger than accountability at this point. It's, are we willing to change the way we think to see a new opportunity?
Yes. And kind of going back to that superintendent story or example that I provided, right?
Mm-hmm.
The value of providing the best outcome for our clients, creating the best whatever we're building, right? That doesn't change. It's that they used to be able to accomplish that using pen and paper. And now, in order to deliver that value, it requires a different way of doing it. So I would agree with you. The value itself, the way you see it show up in the world will change. So by staying on paper and pencil, I'm now actually acting in a way counter to the value of providing the best possible product for our clients, being people of our word, doing what we say, following through on time and on budget. I'm violating all of those things because I'm unable or unwilling to adopt a new way of getting the result. Because now the ante is much higher.
Yeah.
It's faster. It's got to be faster, bigger, cheaper. It's got to be all things.
Well, totally. I mean,
impossible. I can't do that the same way I used to do things.
I'm going to just use my own personal example, right? I have, and we think about, oh no, I don't want to say that. Okay, hang on. How can I say this? Okay, so one of the things, right, that we learn that I wish I had learned earlier was this concept of compounding interest. Granted, interest rates when I was a kid are very different than interest rates of my kid today. Okay, so I'm talking about equivalent 13 years ago, a long time ago. I don't know. I can't do that math. In the 90s versus 13 years today, our compounding is going to be different. But the point is it exists. And so what is the purpose of compounding? The purpose of compounding is to be able to add something and let it work for us.
Yes.
And the more we have something that can work for us, the less we have to do it on our own. We forget and some of us might think, oh, I got to just keep adding. I've got to just keep adding. And whatever happens, happens. And that's just like gravy. Okay. But why aren't we leveraging the gravy? That's the thing. How can we be using some of this concept of compounding in that way? Because and this is where strategy will fall short and we get stuck in some of this other stuff, coming back to open-mindedness, is that our ability to connect, our ability to communicate might lose focus when things go sideways. Nothing goes in a straight line. boy, don't we wish our plans would always go to straight line. I'm so glad I have a problem with linear time because it doesn't matter anyway. And in this particular case and in this particular example, all I'm saying here, though, is that since we never have a straight line, what we can do is we can leverage that. I'm not going to have a straight line. So my job is to know, what are my cues that I'm off track? What are my cues that I'm no longer in the general trajectory and somehow the bumpers in my bowling lane have deflated and I'm in the gutter, or I'm in the lane next door because I had so much momentum, I jumped right over, right? Whatever that case may be, we've got to be able to have something in our non-negotiables that helps us go, ooh, I need to course correct. Ooh, this is actually different than the course I set. Ooh, what question do I actually need to ask here? Because it's different than what we were expecting. Not that it can't be used, it could probably be leveraged in a very positive way, but we have to find those places and only we can decide them. And that's what we're really talking about, these non-negotiables and institutionalizing the way we work. We're institutionalizing the outcomes we want. We want to do this because by doing this, we're creating value and that value translates into revenue.
Yes. Yes. And then there are certain things we do that feel like we're actually getting something done, making progress or contributing, but they're really not. So there was a really interesting comment on one of your posts about the experience of going in and watching teams brainstorm, but never do. Talk, not do, right?
Does Penny's name sound familiar? That sounds like something Penny would say.
Perhaps. I apologize for not knowing to whom to attribute it, but a lot of us who are brought in to look at an organization and make recommendations on how to optimize. Process is a natural place to go. It's often more comfortable than talking about the people piece, because again, we may want to avoid conflict or discomfort. And people are harder to change than processes are. But if the process is not the problem, and it really is about who's doing what and when, we are distracted from actually solving the problem of why isn't my plan being executed. And so I just want to go back to this idea of like, well, their problem is they brainstorm a lot. First, if they're brainstorming and not doing, they never actually even got to creating a plan. They only stayed in the ideation stage, right? Mm-hmm. And then that behavior may not be aligned with their values. If they want to truly be innovative, let's say that's one of their core values, innovation actually requires taking action, doing and learning, doing and learning, doing and learning. It's all about the iteration. So they might self-reflect on why are we not getting to the iteration stage of this? And then the idea that anybody's going to come in and help execute on brainstorms is unfair to whoever was asked to come in and do that, right? We have to be able to move past a brainstorm to actually select among the choices, the ones we think have the greatest potential to take us where we want to go. We have to put a stake in the ground. We got to put our bumper rails up. Mm-hmm. We got to set those deadlines, timelines, and decide how we're going to do it. And then the collective that was responsible for creating those decisions and codifying them in the plan has to be responsible for either bringing in the people who weren't included in the planning process or communicating through their other roles what it's going to take to make that happen. So what I thought about, the comment brought up a lot for me, mostly like nobody's going to come in and fix it.
Right.
But, also just looking at what parts of the conversation we're having right now are applicable. Where is there an absence of rails or bumpers? Where is there an absence of clarity around how this value shows up in our organization? Where is there an absence of noticing and naming things that may not be aligned to that? And how much of that is process and how much of that is that leadership in particular may need to make choices that are about how to behave differently moving forward.
You are watching It's Your Business, hosted by the Bold Business Podcast. And guess what? This is Christy and I'm Jess.
Hey.
And we are here. We are talking about good plans going bad and why they actually happen. And so far in this program, not only are we trying to go deep in this, not only are we trying to help with some understanding and meet you exactly where you are in our conversation, We want you to be successful and have achievement. And that's what makes it bold to be in business today. The desire to do that. What is that next step? What is that action that you can take right now to plant the seed for whatever you have coming next? And here's the deal. Everything's ever evolving. Here's the deal. We're glad you're here. And Christy, remind us what you do.
Purpose First Advisors. We work with growth-oriented business owners to create more value in their business and prepare them for whatever the succession plan and exit planning work they need to do to make sure that the value they've created lasts for generations.
And I'm Jess Duell at Red Direction. We are talking about strategic growth. And we're talking about these plans that are 3 years and 5 years down the road, probably in the road too, but definitely down the road. And the purpose being, how do we show up now to get to where we want to go? And what does that look like? Because we will all be evolving and becoming who we need to become, and evolving our companies to who it needs to be able to continue to thrive over time. And we're talking today again about execution. We're talking about, and we started with, what is our accountability script? Where are we at today with accountability, the reels of it? And then we were talking about our non-negotiables and how that shows up, and differentiating between process versus outcome, and the importance of that related to strategy. And now we're going to move into our third part, which is everybody being engaged. That strategy is set. The time has been taken, and we know what we're going to say. We're able to repeat it over and over again, almost verbatim, because we know that's the right message then for where we're going. And then it's all about, so here's where all the bumps in the roads come up. We started talking about this a little bit, but let's go deeper into this. What can we do to ensure we stay on track and have that success?
Well, and like you, I always do some research before we talk about these things to see what other people are thinking and saying about these topics. I know when we share this out, there'll be a list of resources. We both found different HBR articles about this, because what's old is new again forever. And, so you'll notice that our references go back. They weren't just research from the last 12 to 18 months, but research that has really held up over time. And one of those things is what I mentioned earlier, is that most leaders recognize that there's a disconnect between the plan they have and the execution they're seeing. Most leaders also recognize that the place where it's breaking down is the inability of their teams to work together to achieve collective goals. And what they've also recognized was that it was much easier to focus on process than people. And even though process isn't going to move the dial on that, it's where we're most comfortable. But also people are messy, right? And so what they're really discovering is that engaging the broader team at the end of the process, when it's fully baked, and now it's a list of to-dos with deadlines and responsible parties, right? Bringing them in, handing them a plan and saying, go do this, is too late.
Mm-hmm.
And they're actually not avoiding working with people at that point. They're avoiding engaging their people earlier in the process, because more people introduces more variability. And the larger the organization, the harder it is to get a representative group of people together without it being unwieldy, taking forever, etc. So those of us with smaller teams, even though, we might feel like we need to go away, make these plans, and then present them to our teams as whole cloth. And what the researchers are saying is, in fact, you need to open up a dialogue with them at the beginning. Explain your thought processes, bring them into that fold, and deal with whatever might come up. That thing you're avoiding, where somebody tells you it might not work, or it can't be done that way, or we tried that and this is what happened. And work through those things so that when there is a plan in place and people do have assignments and deadlines, they are bought into the process. So people try to avoid the messiness, but they also try to avoid the delay that it's perceived to create. This idea that you have to slow down to speed up. And I would argue that, particularly on that point, By waiting till the end to bring people in, there's such a high level of ambiguity, a lack of clarity and buy-in, that process actually slows you down more than bringing them in the beginning. When if you can get them aligned from the beginning, you can actually recoup any slowdown you may have experienced early on. So that's a lot of words. But
Well,
basically,
there's a lot in there.
what happened at the end.
There's a lot in there, and I will say that there's a lot of overlap with what I could say. So instead of repeating myself, where could I add? That's what I'm sifting through at this moment. And the first thing I could say is middle management, directors and below. Sometimes we get a handed test and we have to figure it out.
Yep.
So I'm going to put myself in the we spot. Been there, done that a
Yep.
lot. And so I may not know the why. I may not understand the thing. I just understand this is what I have now been tasked with. And I understand my part in the bigger, is part of this bigger picture that I may or may not get to understand how they all fit together. Okay, fine. So in my role at this director level, what I could say is, great. So I'm going to now have this. We got to get in a room. And in this room, I want this meeting, and I want this meeting to look like this. And it might be however long it's going to be, it doesn't matter. And here are going to be the things that we're going to talk about. And the outcome being, what do we have today that could actually move us toward this? And another outcome would be, what are the things we wish we had because we think it would make it easier to get to this goal? And from that information, now they're in at the beginning. They know as much as I do, but I've got this thing to tool around to figure out what is my message so that I can be a broken record, but I can also check in and be like, am I anywhere on track? What else do I need to know about this? Because here's where we're at, and here's what we are ready to do, and here's what we're willing to work toward readily. And if we're on track, great. If we're not, it's a perfect opportunity to go, so shape this with me, and then I can go back and do what I need to do to start executing this long-term thing, okay? So now I'm going to go up one other level. And if I'm in an executive role, if I am a business owner, maybe I'm sitting on a board of a small company, and the business owners and the founders, they say, hey, this is what we're going to do. Right? Maybe we want to get into a new market. Maybe we want to develop a market we already have. Maybe we want to make a new product. Maybe we want to diversify and add a complementary product, right? 4 basic ways to grow. My questions then, as that board member or fellow executive of a smaller organization, are very clear. Is, okay, so where are you coming from? What's the momentum that we have? How are we going to be doing these things? Because what are we doing? We're asking questions, not to challenge. These are not challenge questions, people. These are, let's understand what's behind it, because we all need to be here at the beginning. Somebody's got to come up with the idea. It is very courageous. And sometimes, depending on our personality, it takes a lot to even share these things. So being able to receive it and go, cool, got it, process it real fast, and then what are the questions that I can better understand, seek to understand, because now we have the common ground, and together we can find out what is the underlying reason, what is the underlying pressure, and then bring in the diverse experience across all of the people in that room to say, this might be disruption, this might be an opportunity. Oh, there's actually nothing here because of this and this and this and this. But what are we doing? We have a data set. We're working from the same data set. And I think that that's an incredibly important piece, because to the point of engagement, wherever we get to start engaging everybody needs to be the beginning, is where I was going with
yes, that. It all needs to be at the beginning.
It all needs to be at the beginning.
You're least likely to want to do it, and it has the potential to be most messy. So you have to have a process in your organization for how you solicit information, integrate, process, analyze it, and then formulate decisions, because not everybody gets a vote.
Well, and I think, I'm going to yes and you here, because realistically, I think sometimes when the vote has already been made, doesn't matter where it's coming from. The point is we don't need to we need to understand it, because what do we need to do? We need to go get the value. We need to go get the thing.
Correct. Again, we need to all be on that same page,
So,
right?
by the way, this comes back to culture. This comes back to accountability. If we have, and so we got to remove that, right? We need to remove that from different things. And so I really feel like my and here is sometimes it's decided for us and nobody gets to say, right? We're saying it's kind of being said like, well, somebody made this decision. Well, sometimes it's made for us because of technology. Sometimes it's made for us because of disruption of another organization's actions. Sometimes it's just whatever it's going to be, right? There are all kinds of different
So
things.
we can make meaning together. I mean, at that point, then the purpose of engaging people at that point is to make meaning together, to have understanding, to COVID changed how we were doing business practically overnight. We didn't get a say in it, but we had to respond to it, and we had to make meaning together in real time. Right? And even now, as we grapple with things like work from home and remote work, we may feel like we have more choice in what we tell or ask of our employees, but we're also still in the process of making meaning. What does it mean for to spend 2-3 years working remotely and then decide that that's no longer a way we want to work? And you will lose some people because they have decided that their value set is designed around this new way of working, right? So really making meaning together, understanding what it is we're trying to achieve together, exploring the why and finding the why for yourself. The owner's why might be because this increases the value of the business, allows me to sell in a couple of years and spend time with my grandkids. They may not communicate that why to you at all. Your why might be because having this job allows me to do fulfilling work with people I like. Right? So that may be why I adopt the change. Maybe that's why I adopt and take as mine to execute the responsibilities that I've been given as part of this plan. That's why I'm committed to the accountability and the execution. Because we found our own why. But as leaders, we should expect to be able to answer that question. Why? Why is this important? Why are we doing this and not that? Because if we can't answer it to other people, that means we didn't really answer it to ourselves. And that means we probably didn't make those choices with as much intention as we could.
Yeah. And you know what? It's interesting because I think sometimes these things are made more often than not without really understanding the why. There's a general lever or a push. And so if you find yourself in that situation, the more planning, the better. I'm all about stopping. I'm all about taking the time. I'm all about doing the deep work. And sometimes we can't, or sometimes we don't think we can, either one of those things. Or sometimes we're already in the middle of something that maybe we don't have a why to. But you know what? I don't think it's a bad thing. I think we could start today and say, hey, well, so what do we have that can solve it today? And then I think the next question is, and what do we need to continue to solve it into the future? Because here's where we're going to move into that growth and relevance over time. And so if we don't have a why, we'll find it with those two things. Here's what we can do today. Here's what we need to become. Here's what we need to continue to make a difference in the future. And so while I advocate, take the time, start, get your why. Every single company I've come from, I have worked with in the last 5 years has never taken that time.
Agreed. I mean, do as we say, not as we do, right?
I was going to say, and so I want to call it out and say, okay, but that doesn't mean you can't start. That doesn't mean you're behind. That doesn't mean anything. It means be right here and know. So what are we solving and how are we solving it today? And is it going to be relevant in the future? What do we need to change about what we're doing to be relevant in the future? Because our why will be discovered. And that's important. And it can evolve, by the way. Maybe we get to one level. We're like, well, now what? By the way, I have a lot of clients that get to that. Oh,
you should
that. Now what?
You have a new normal at that point.
What?
You should be asking new questions because your reality has changed.
Yes. And that's for people too. I want to say, we were talking about uncomfortable. We were talking about what are we normalizing? We're talking about these outcomes and engaging people along the way. I think it is incredibly important that everybody have a voice of what do we need to succeed tomorrow and in the future.
Yes.
Because we never know where the great ideas are going to come from. We never know which ones are going to line up best with what the opportunities lie in the moment that we are able to make the decision when we choose to make a decision. And so if we can normalize that, everybody stops thinking about how do I optimize what I'm doing today? And they're optimizing the outcome for tomorrow. That just means more of everything else we want will happen on its own.
I love that. It also makes me think of another resource, a book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy.
Oh, yeah.
And that idea that when we realize that we haven't chosen strategy, perhaps with as much intention as we might want to, that we can make a different choice moving forward and do both. And we can address what needs to be done to take the next step today and tomorrow and to get the outcomes we want. And how can we be more intentional with the time? Because again, this is that time of year where you are being asked to devote chunks of time to a planning process.
Yeah.
And so if your process isn't yielding a plan that gets you optimal results, it could be a function of a good plan gone bad, which we're defining as a failure to execute. Or it could be that it was a bad strategy masquerading as a good strategy, meaning that the plan itself will only help us produce a bad strategy and the outcomes associated with it. So as you're in this time and you think, I should just go in a room and do this by myself because, we're just not getting the results we want. Looking back over who's engaged in the process and what process are we actually using to come up with our strategies and the plans and the steps required to execute.
I found it.
Still making forward progress.
Yep. I found it as Kimberly Leverder. I think that's it. Leverder is how I say your name, Kimberly. I apologize for mispronouncing it. But she is the one who's talking about amazing ideas, but then it sits and nothing moves forward. So I wanted to do a call out. We were going to get that right in here. So I want to know, what are your takeaways from our conversation today, Christy?
That always it comes back to people and your ability to communicate with and coordinate the activities of those people. You have talented people. If you're relatively small, you have really a greater likelihood of also having really passionate people. And you probably are in more intimate relationship with them than if it's a larger organization. So use that to your point of leverage. You leverage the relationships you have with your team to build the best possible plan and plan of action as you possibly can.
I have two takeaways. The first one is I really like my fill in the blank exercise for accountability. That's really stuck with me this whole time. So let me just say,
that's yours, girl.
I really like the idea of this, and I'm probably now going to do it because yes, I'm actually working, right? I'm working on what our next 18 months is going to look like here at Red Direction. And I think taking 5 days to do that noticing would be really insightful, especially as I'm preparing for things like the Driving Solutions Intensive and some other things like that. But I'm just like, oh yeah, that would help me too. So I not only was it a cool thing that I filled in the blank with this structure that I use, but I'm doing it. So that's one of my takeaways. And the other takeaway is normalizing the engagement with the right people and understanding where they see our success as an organization going forward, what they see as a way to help us do more of the solution providing that we are for our customers, to really understand, okay, cool. Maybe that'll help us define our boundaries a little bit more. Maybe that'll help us figure out what processes actually work. Maybe it'll help us find out when it's time to let something go. Maybe it'll be time to go, like, no matter what, this will always stay. And what is that and why? And really be able to test some of those assumptions. So that was my My second takeaway is that the ability to engage in a way that is clear and everybody understands their purpose, but also gets to be part of the future is an interesting is an interesting thing that I do not see many companies doing. And processing through that, the ones that I do see doing that and the ones that have implemented that I've been working with have greater results over time.
They do. They simply do. I mean, the research that tells us having a diverse team improves the top and bottom line for a company. The reason isn't because they're somehow able to magically infuse the company with different ideas. It's that they've been purposefully invited people with different points of view, perspectives, experience, and backgrounds to come together to share those differences and mediate them into a way that actually creates something that's even more valuable than what we might have just come to the table with ourselves. And that requires a lot of effort, a lot of skill, and a lot of time, but the results are proven. The results speak for themselves.
And we're not alone here, people.
No.
We are not alone. 80% of leaders feel like their company is good at crafting strategy. Only 44% feel like they do a decent job at implementation. I mean, here's the deal. 67% of well-formulated strategies fail. Here's another one. 22% of employees feel like leaders have a clear direction for the organization. All of those, the problem solutions in some capacity were set out in front of you here. So if you relate to any of those three stats, any of those groups of people, you now have something to work with, think about, internalize, and take away and do something about it. Take the next action. All right, until next time.
Thank you.